Tony is particularly focused on judicial immunity, and he wants to put an end to that as well. He is armed with all the facts, the case citations, and he will tell you anything you want to know about this sport because he's anxious to make the change. There's one thing about my friend Anthony Pappas that I think stands higher than the things I've seen in this reform movement, and that is that this gentleman gets up every morning, and he continues to fight. He continues to pursue the things for us. He is particularly affected by suicide. It affects him as if this was his daughter or his son, his brother, or any other family member, and for you, for that matter. If anyone here were sadly to succumb to that sort of thing, he would be the guy that would cry for you if necessary. So here's a man I'm very honored to introduce as our next guest, Tony Pappas.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We have to stick together and fight injustice. As Leon said, I have these academic credentials. I'll just make a little correction. I got a bachelor's degree from MIT, and I got a PhD from Yale University. And as he pointed out, in my divorce case, there were no issues of child custody and visitation because of my advanced age when the divorce started. Back in 2004, the children who were over 18 were close to it, and now, of course, they're in their 30s. But the case is still ongoing, so there never was really an issue about child support and visitation. So the judges had to move on to other bizarre situations to persecute me. So one of their bizarre situations was to accuse me of committing a crime equivalent to manslaughter, violent Class B felony. That's manslaughter where somebody gets killed. That wasn't exactly what they said, but rape is a Class B felony, arson is a Class B felony. Mine was assault in the first degree leading to permanent disfigurement. So the judge is writing, I punched my wife, fractured her face. She had reconstructive surgery with anesthesia. She paid $8,000 to have this, and it was charged on her credit card, and she was paying exorbitant interest. So this is totally irrational because if somebody goes to the emergency room of a hospital with a bullet wound or a knife wound or your hand is chopped off, the people in the hospital, the emergency room, are mandated reporters. They're supposed to call the police, and often the police are right at the emergency room. They're supposed to conduct an investigation and find the perpetrator of the crime. So how can a judge be writing that they're this criminal walking in and out of my court trying to get a divorce instead of being up in Attica State Prison? All right, so the judge, he must have wanted to help me out by showing he was totally irrational and biased. So he said I committed this, which was like a total hallucination, but he's writing it down in his decision. On the following page, he accommodates me again. He writes, I'm a terrorist. So he says, I made thinly veiled threats in the idiom used by the perpetrator of the Fort Hood massacre. In Fort Hood, Texas, Nidal Hassan, an Army psychiatrist, killed 13 soldiers and wounded 32. So the judge is writing this down. I made threats in the idiom used by the perpetrator of the Fort Hood massacre, and it's reported to the Judicial Threats Unit. Well, that's what he said he did. It was reported to the Judicial Threats Unit. Now, we understand that if a high school student says, I'm so angry at my algebra teacher, I'm going to blow up the school cafeteria, they're going to arrest him. By the grace of God, the judge is writing I'm a terrorist, and it's reported to the Judicial Threats Unit, but I'm still walking around because the FBI can't find me, and I'm, somehow escaping their jurisdiction or something. All right, so again, this is just a sample of the irrational situations you can have where judges want to persecute you. This first person, Stanley Gartenstein, he stepped off the case like a month later. He didn't really want to, but somehow I maneuvered, and he saw the light, and another judge sort of helped out. So he stepped off the case, but this irrationality and abuse and bias continued with other judges who just repeated the same accusations, issued a gag order, don't complain to anybody inside or outside the court system, and if you feel I'm violating your right to free speech, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And that still is in effect. It's never been overturned, so I'm violating the court order by complaining to you about what the judges do. So again, I was fortunate. I didn't have to cope with my children, being given, to my ex-spouse as for custody purposes, and not being able to call them or, wish them happy birthday or whatever. So that helped me out. I had tenure at St. John's University, so even though the combined legal fees that were imposed on me came to like $2 million, I managed to overcome that or cope with it. I was helped out by inheriting, my parents' house where I, live, and that's mortgage-free and so forth. There were special situations that helped me out. All right, but I understand how hard it is for people not to be able to see their children. I can tell you if, I held my little babies when they were 2 years old, I held them in my arms, and if the judge had told me when they were 5 years old, you can't see them or talk to them or, visit them, I would have, committed suicide, or I would have tried to do something, violent and berserk. I was, devoted to my children, and, you can't tolerate situations where, judges ignore the law and the facts and just do whatever they feel like. But I'd like to give my suggestions about what should be done here. I'm passionate about judicial immunity and overturning that. I hope we're all familiar with the case of Stump v. Sparkman. I'll just give the broad details. There was a 15-year-old girl. Her mother didn't have parenting skills, so she walks into the courtroom and tells the judge, my daughter's not doing her homework and she's seen older men. There could be bad consequences. I think you should sterilize her. So the judge calls the 15-year-old girl into the courtroom, after the mother made the request. At some point he calls her in. He tells her, go to the hospital to get your appendix removed. He secretly tells the surgeon, do a tubal ligation, tying up her fallopian tubes. The girl was permanently sterilized. She did not have an attorney representing her as a minor. She didn't know what was happening. She thought her appendix was being removed. She did not have a chance to appeal, right? How does a 15-year-old girl take appeals without an attorney? So she married a couple of years later, learned she could not conceive, and tried to sue the judge and everybody involved. So it reached the Court of Appeals in Chicago, which covers the Midwestern states. This was in Indiana. The Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals in Chicago, found in favor of the girl. Due process had been violated. Her civil rights had been violated. Then the judge appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Surprisingly, the Supreme Court thought it was worthy to take up this case, and they issued a 5-3 decision saying judges have immunity, they can't be sued, and they can do whatever they feel like. And this is still binding precedent. So how can you have a situation for justice when this is binding precedent and the judges themselves say we are above the law? Now, we hear all the politicians get up and say no one is above the law. Attorney General Barr is not above the law. President Trump is not above the law. Senator Al Franken, who grabbed women by their breasts, he was forced to resign. He's not above the law. Policemen aren't above the law, right? No group of citizens is above the law. And most of these politicians are aware that judges have placed themselves above the law, so they're total hypocrites. And, we all are pointing out that, there are these rules that the judges are supposed to follow, or the Supreme Court says they're supposed to follow. Well, the Supreme Court should overturn this doctrine of judicial immunity, but it hasn't done that. And these other guidelines that it gives, we see that they don't have to be followed, so they're ineffective. And, we can complain about it, and I endorse what we are doing. But let me give you 2 suggestions for additional paths that we can take, which can possibly produce results. So one is political advocacy. As Leon said, I ran for the United States Congress, and my main reason was to try to raise this issue. I knew the registration disadvantage was 6-1 Democrats over Republicans. I didn't expect to win. AOC became a media star, and that sort of helps me a little bit because I can point to that. Who did you run against? Well, AOC. Hey, who's the guy who ran against her, right? So right over here. Right. So again, the point is there are many political positions that some of us or our friends or relatives can run for. It doesn't have to be U.S. Congress. It can be state assembly, state senate, city council, school boards, or whatever. If we examine the political process, we see there are many cases where the incumbent doesn't face any opposition. He just gets renominated by his own party. The other party doesn't run anybody against him. So just step up and say, I want to represent the other party, whether it's Republican or Democrat, or try to be a candidate of a third party. Your point is not really to win, but to have a platform to raise awareness about these problems. And if there are, 10 candidates doing it and then 200, hopefully some of them will get the media attention and they'll be on television and radio shows or in, major newspapers, and gradually this issue might get some attention. All right, so as I say, that nobody has suggested this yet. Consider it, try to run in the next elections, become active in your local club, so you're elected leader of the local club in your neighborhood, whether it's Democratic or Republican. Try to get yourself or somebody else nominated to run for some elective office. And this doesn't have to be the entire issue or platform on which one runs, but try it out, see whether it resonates, and start getting some attention. So that's one suggestion. The other suggestion is try to involve religious leaders. I'm of Greek heritage. My religion is Greek Orthodox. I've tried to involve my own church, but I've also reached out to other churches, and all of you can do that. You don't have to stick to your own religion. Go to other churches. So you can go to Catholic bishops or archbishops or Protestant pastors or Muslim imams or whatever. I don't think they're going to arrest you if you go to religious leaders and complain about parental alienation or injustice or unfairness in the courts. So what I succeeded in doing, and I'll encourage all of you to consider it. As I said, I'm not Greek Orthodox, but I wrote several letters to Pope Francis at the Vatican. Over the course of like 3 to 4 years, I wrote about 5 letters, and dated September 11, 2018, I received this response. Dear Mr. Pappas, the Holy Father has received your letter, and he has asked me to thank you. He appreciates the concerns which prompted you to share your thoughts with him. His Holiness will remember you in his prayers, and he sends you his blessing. Yours sincerely in Christ, Monsignor Paolo Borgia, Assessor. All right, this is, again, a general statement that the Pope is praying for me, and he blessed me. I don't think the Monsignor is lying, and he can't be saying, "Oh, I'm just making this up," right? And it's not a routine response. So as I say, other people have made donations to the Vatican, or they write letters. Not everybody gets a response, even if it's not very specific. But as I said, I encourage all of you to do it, whether you're Roman Catholic or some other religion, and go to, as I said, Protestant pastors or Greek Orthodox priests or archbishops or whatever, or Muslim imams. Try to get them involved. The address for Pope Francis is very simple. You'll recall it. It's very simple. Sending the first class letter by Global First Class, I think, costs $1.15. So you can write something up to an ounce for $1.15. The address is His Holiness Pope Francis, Apostolic Palace, Vatican City. Vatican City is its own nation. Usually the post office clerks don't know this and want you to write Italy or something, but that's wrong. So tell them to look it up on their computer. They'll find out that Vatican City is its own nation, and again, the proper address is His Holiness Pope Francis, Apostolic Palace, Vatican City. We have to feel that Pope Francis is a different kind of pope. I regard him as more compassionate. He has dealt with issues in various ways. In terms of things like homosexuality, he's come out and said, "Who am I to judge?" He's been compassionate in other ways. He said, "Don't build walls, build the bridges," and we may or may not agree to that. But as I say, it's very easy to write a letter, and for $1.15 or whatever the postage is, send letters, and maybe they'll take up the cause, or he'll issue something that will say, we'd like the courts to provide justice so people don't commit suicide. Mothers and fathers don't commit suicide, right? That's what we're trying to achieve. So if we get something positive from that out of the Vatican, or from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, or some Protestant pastor, whether he's a Lutheran or Episcopalian or whatever denomination, hopefully that'll help us as well. So I'm offering those 2 other paths, and if you're able to, try to find the energy and the motivation to pursue them. Thank you very much.